Good evening. The three Ps tonight: politicians, property purchase taxes, and physiotherapists. But here's Ted with the rundown.
Tonight on Webster, is there a bright side to last week's provincial budget? Except for the sales and restaurant taxes, almost everything is going to cost more. Tonight, Webster looks at two of the items and services targeted in Mel Couvalier's new budget. Coming up, physiotherapists Craig Ross and Jan Lowcock on the new $5 user surcharge. And on the property purchase tax, Webster talks with Brian Calder, past president of the Real Estate Board. But first, why is the NDP courting the favor of Quebec? Is a landslide there the best guarantee of winning the NDP the spot as the official opposition? Tonight, Webster speaks with federal NDP leader Ed Broadbent on the policies and plans of the New Democrat.
Mr. Broadbent, I know the NDP is riding high, and you hope to ride higher. But bear with me when I say this to you. After Lowcock was thrown out, and all that separation business disappeared, why do you and the NDP have to change your policy to curry favor on giving Quebec the right to separate?
2 points. First of all, our greatly increased support in Quebec has occurred up to this point when there was no discussion of the Constitution at all, so we don't need to curry favor. They're now supporting us for tax fairness, for job reasons, just as other Canadians are. The second point is that Quebec is the only province that hasn't signed the constitutional accord. They're still out, so all the federal parties right now are going through a process of developing a position on the Constitution.
Right as of this moment, the Constitution can be changed without the approval of Quebec. Is that correct?
Indeed.
What would the formula be for that, though?
Well, what the formula is now is that 7 provinces, as long as it includes 50% of the population, can change the Constitution, could take away powers, and what we are, say, existing powers from a province, and what we are doing in our resolution is to try to understand that Quebec, as the only province with a French-speaking majority, is a minority within the rest of Canada, and we're saying we should understand that they're afraid that the rest of us might gang up on them. So we're proposing a change that would allow Quebec to say no if we tried to cut into their powers.
Well, I always remember Trudeau saying that he would have nothing to do with the disintegration of Canada. Is this not the kind of move which would raise the hackles of the purists, in which you're saying the right of the people of Quebec to freely determine their future and, in effect, to go any way they wanted?
No, I think quite the opposite.
But am I not correct in my memory?
Well, you're correct in your memory that Mr. Trudeau, as Prime Minister, was going to fight as vigorously as he could to stop the disintegration of Canada, as a lot of us did. But what this resolution, in fact, is aimed at doing is to get them to join the Constitution, and it has, the thrust of what we're saying has had the support, for example, of Jean Chrétien. It has had the support of many liberals in the province of Quebec, as well as many conservatives in the province of Quebec. And what I really do want to stress, as a Canadian myself who lives outside of Quebec, it gives Quebec no power over the rest of us. It says that the rest of us can't gang up on Quebec. It gives them the right to say, to us, we can't use the Constitution to take away your existing powers.
I've got that, Now, in other words, Quebec would not have a veto to stop constitutional changes in the rest of Canada.
No, not if we want, if, for example, British Columbians got together with people from 6 other provinces and they wanted to give up education or workmen's compensation to the federal government, we could all do that. But Quebec could say, no, we don't want to join in, we want to retain that power. And we think that that's very important.
In other words, they would raise their own taxes for their own particular purposes,
Absolutely.
Be it compensation board or education or language or anything else.
And they would raise their own revenues and have to pay for their own programs, and if we wanted to change, we should be able to do that.
Didn't they have that part of that power before, in that they could set up their own Quebec pension plan, etc., etc., etc.?
Indeed. And so this is an extension of what we've already done in the Canada Pension Act, and allow Quebec to do it in other areas. And I repeat, to keep what powers they now have.
So therefore what you've done is that you've made the old kind of stodgy centrist or centralist NDP party into a more liberal party. attracting votes in Quebec.
You know how to hurt a fellow.
I'm right,
We're not making it into a more liberal party. The official Liberal Party position still is not accepted what we're arguing. Certain Liberals like Mr. Chrétien have accepted what we're arguing, and I hope the Prime Minister and the government eventually, when it reveals its constitutional position, will do the same thing, and that we can get Quebec on board, and then we can go on and deal with all the kinds of economic and social matters that most Quebecers, as well as other Canadians, want us to be dealing with.
I know that separation is not a big issue in Quebec at the moment, but you must be appeasing a lot of sensitive feelings by your move there, by possibly dragging in a much more NDP support. That's your policy move, isn't it?
Well, our policy has been worked on for 2 years leading up to this, since the last election, and I repeat, we've got our current strength in Quebec for entirely different reasons, for social and economic reasons. What I hope this would do is be attractive to the government of Quebec as well as other Canadians, so that Quebec would join the Constitution, and we could go on now with a renewed federation with all the provinces on board and deal with all the other questions.
Yeah, because in fact, as you said earlier, they have not yet signed our Constitution.
That's right. And
that was when Levesque walked away in a snit about that after the kitchen meetings and whatnot.
And what's important for us to understand, it wasn't just Mr. Levesque, but every provincial party in Quebec was opposed to the present Constitution. So those of us who live outside have to understand that. It isn't just the PQ, but the provincial Liberals, the provincial Conservatives, the provincial New Democrats want us to, if you like, at least accept their right to retain what powers they now have in the Constitution. I think we should do it and get it over with.
How does it feel to be still so high in the polls and the personally most popular political leader in the country?
I have been in other places in the past, as my party has been, so I know in political life you can go down as well as up. But as Ernest Hemingway once said, if you had to choose between the miseries of being rich or the miseries of being poor, he'd choose being rich any day. And as a politician, I'm much happier than when we're popular.
A couple of other things, though. I mean, you've always had good, solid policies. For instance, you're against deregulation. You're against privatization. You would never have sold the Challenger or Canadair. Are these policies being impressed by you in Quebec? Or are you also going a little bit more into the middle on those nowadays?
No.
Free trade, for instance. Protection for textiles in Quebec.
No. Free trade, we're concerned about free trade in British Columbia. We're concerned about the reality that the forest products industry has had free trade with the United States for 50 years, but we're still confronted with seemingly insuperable barriers from the U.S. whenever we win the competition.
It's going to be potash next.
Well, the potash is underway now. So what we're saying in terms of our trade position, yes, expanded trade with the United States by all means. We're each the other's favorite customer, but by no means should we be giving up traditional Canadian rights, social programs, economic development programs.
Regional disparity.
Regional disparities. We can't give those things up to have some new trading arrangement. Remember, we export now 90% into the U.S. without tariffs now.
But, you know, for people who just read the headlines and watch the top of the news, it looks as if Mulroney and company are racing into an agreement before the deadlines in the fall, racing into an agreement which might well give no protection to weakened industries, be very light on our cultural protection. Is there a danger that Mulroney will do that?
Absolutely. And let me take the good competitive small industries, whether they're in British Columbia or wherever they may be located. What I fear, perhaps as much as anything, is in this phase-in period that they're talking about, U.S. bigger companies will move in and buy up, gobble up, because we have no protective legislation, good, small, vibrant, innovative Canadian firms. I'm afraid Mr. Mulroney will do the same kind of smiling giveaway, to put it bluntly, on this as he's done on everything else with the U.S. relationships. He just seems to think the best thing about being a good neighbor is to smile and get along. Well, you can always get along if you don't forcefully stand up for Canadian interests.
So there won't be a Mulroney-type free trade agreement, you don't think, if he uses his head by the end of the year?
I'm not sure. I think he will try to get something by October, which is the deadline for the U.S. Congress to get a package that they can't tamper with.
Congress changes, though, in October, doesn't it? I mean, the other people are in charge now. Protectionism is still going to be there, isn't it?
It's going to be there. The people that are in there now But Mr. Reagan's mandate on this particular item with Congress expires by October, and if we don't get a deal, that is between the two countries, by then I think it's ball game over.
Now, one other question. The Auto Pact.
Yes.
We regard that as the jewel in your crown in Ontario. Can the Auto Pact survive free trade? It couldn't, could it?
It could not survive free trade, and what we want to do, as I said, I think, Jack, even on your program, many times, is that this government that is bringing in Japanese producers now, instead of having them plunk down in Ontario, we should develop an industry here, that the U.S. automotive industry is expanded to California. There's no reason, and especially under the Auto Pact, why we couldn't be putting up those new plants in British Columbia, because under the Auto Pact, they could not only serve Western Canada, they could serve the California, Oregon, and Washington state markets. What we ought to do is incorporate the Japanese companies into the Auto Pact, just the way we have with General Motors, Chrysler, and
Except,
Ford.
mind you, we've got to play footsie with the Japanese because we're so dependent on the coal, you know.
Well, that's the kind of game we play too long, that they get our raw materials and export finished products like cars. Why don't we just get a little tougher? We have the 7th largest automotive market in the world. We should be saying to the Japanese, if you want access to it, you put your plants in Canada, and by the way, you can put them in British Columbia because that's closer to Japan.
I shouldn't argue about your lack of a clear policy on withdrawing from NATO or NORAD, should I?
You raise any questions, Jack, you wish. We have a security policy that you will be hearing more about after the government produces its white paper in a month. We have said that security is the name of the game, and for example, in terms of the U.S. desire not to have an attack made on it out of the blue, we have advocated modernizing the North Warning System.
But no cruise.
No cruise, absolutely not no cruise.
No cruise. My thanks to Ed Broadbent.
It's been a pleasure.
Brian Calder is a director of the Real Estate Board, and I get the feeling in our little pre-interview chat that you're hot about social credit and Cuvalier's progressive real estate tax in the land registry. How hot are you?
I am incensed that there was no consultative process with the industry or the public at large. If this had ever been put to the public prior to the election, there would not be as many MLAs of the SOCRED persuasion in this government today.
But he says it's only going to collect $168 million fairly painlessly, 1% progressive up beyond that, as we all know now.
Well, if that's the case, I would say that he thinks that the market is going to go in half. The activity level is going to go down by 50%, because I feel that they're going to raise over $300 million in this tax. I think the 168 is as much a figure out of the air as this was being put together.
But even $300 million, based on the percentage of the very healthy prices at the moment, is it going to cripple anybody?
I don't know if it's going to cripple. It's going to affect some of the first-time buyers and the people at the bottom end of the scale that need it to be affected adversely the least. It's certainly going to affect them. It's going to affect, in my opinion, handicapped housing, because they're very marginal in their down payment capacity, the co-op housing, seniors housing. The people that can least afford to be affected by this are the ones that are probably going to be hit the hardest, because they're going to be taken right out of the market. The rest can still be in the market, they just have to downscale.
Now, he needed the money, so he's put a sales tax on homes and taken the sales tax off the other things, reducing it to 5%.
If something's broken, Jack, you fix it. But if it's not broken, why fix it?
Now, what about the vacant? How many million square feet are there of vacant offices in downtown Vancouver?
In Class A office space in downtown Vancouver, about 3 million square feet. The average annual take-up in the last few years has been about 300,000 net gain. So
how is this affected by the progressive tax, the purchase, the PTA, PPT?
Well, it's one more, when you combine that with them saying in taxable transactions, item C, leases for a term of more than 3 years shall be subject, not 30 years. This document that's from the government, from the Land Titles Office, dated March 23rd, says, and I'll quote them, lease for the term of more than 3 years is subject as a taxable transaction. That means that an already suffering economy and industry in the downtown office area has the burden of another 2% tax. The real estate people on these larger transactions that actually do something for bringing vendor and purchaser, landlord and tenant together don't make 2%, I can tell you, on the bigger deals. The government is now in the commission business, and make no mistake, this is a sales tax. They've taken 1% off, saying, we are going to eliminate the sales tax. No, they're not doing that at all. They're transferring it over to your shelter. That's where they're taking it from.
But will it affect, for the ordinary person, the actual price of their house? Well, forget all the specialized groups. I mean, if it's $1,500 and a $150,000 house, is that going to be a heavy deterrent on the market?
In my opinion, yes, it is. And it's coming out of the vendor, the owner's pocket, because the purchaser only has a certain amount of money to deal with. And if you say, my down payment is $21,000. Well, you don't go back to him and say, well, I'm sorry, make it $22,500. I don't have more than $21,000. Now, if you have an aunt that will give you the other $1,500, fine. But there aren't many of us around that have an aunt that'll give us the $1,500, hoping that someday we'll be able to pay it back. So, yes, it's going to affect, people are going to have to downscale, or the vendor is going to have to accept a lower price.
Now, you say that there are some creative ways to avoid the tax. Are you willing to talk about them?
Well, I've just gone through this a few times trying to make sense out of the ramifications of it. But if I were a house builder, for example, how could I try and avoid this tax? I've never done this in my life. I've never found that it was ever worthwhile, or nor should one ever think about how to avoid things. But
somebody will if there's a hole in it.
Sure. Especially if particularly if they feel it's an onerous tax that has no place in the philosophical governmental processes of a government that they elected. But anyhow, a builder could, in my opinion, and this bears following through when we see the final form of this dastardly legislation, if it's ever proclaimed, and sell the lot separately from the home, even though he's got the home half built. You take a contract and you say, I will sell you this lot for $40,000, provided that on this separate contract you buy the home for $60,000. The total package is $100,000. So what happens is they pay the 1% tax on the $40,000, the deemed price of the lot, and they pay the $60,000, for argument's sake, for the house, which is not subject to tax because it's a building contract. Now, they may come up with a way of plugging that loophole.
Well, once the assessment comes in, it will become perfectly obvious that if you only paid the 1% of the $40,000, you should have paid it on the $100,000 or whatever.
Well, but the house isn't built. You see, what you're basically doing is you're buying the lot, then you're hiring the contractor to build a house on it for you, and it's not subject to that 1% tax at that time. You resell it as a finished product, as one unit, yes, it is subject to the tax. But if in the commercial industrial field, anytime you own a building, you should own it in a company. And that's all it owns, is the one building. So for each building you own, you set up a separate company. And I don't think this would have a problem applying to residential either. You set that asset, one asset, in the company. Instead of selling under the Land Titles Act, you sell shares.
But
sell the shares in the company.
Only entrepreneurs would do that. As far as ordinary people are concerned, they're nailed every time they make a purchase, except for certain exemptions like recreational property and transfer of family farms. They're nailed when they go to the land registry office after the 23rd of May, which is passed. They've got to put up their 1% in cash at that time.
Or they cannot register that title.
Yeah.
And the lawyers are going to be the ones that are responsible for collecting this and forwarding it and doing all that administrative thing. That's going to cost more money for the conveyance because you're paying them by the hour to do the conveyance, generally speaking. And I don't know why they aren't up in arms about this tax as well, because they're going to bear the brunt of, because that's where the money's going to be paid through. So they'll say, oh, those darn lawyers charging us that tax, and they're going to have to increase their bills for closing on transactions.
Right, now you give me a couple of points too which seem to make it rough for people in the business of foreclosures. What happens on a foreclosure if you've sold a house and had to foreclose on it and the people have left it in a mess?
Well, the way I read this, item F says a quitclaim releasing the interest of a purchaser under an agreement for sale is subject to
The tax.
taxable, as a taxable transaction. That is to say, if a bank or you who loan someone money by agreement for sale to purchase your property is in occupation for a period of time, a couple of years maybe, and they can't make the payments any longer. So times are tough for them and they have no more. You're not getting any income off it for 6 months. It takes you to get 6 months to get them out through the court process. You finally get them out. It's a deemed transfer when you get your title back and you pay on your own property that you've already been beaten up on and suffered a loss from, 1 or 2%, depending on what category you fall in.
Cuvalier didn't miss any bets. It covers every piece of land title transfer with certain exceptions we know about from now on, and it's 1% on the first 100,000, and then it goes to, what's the balance?
2% after 200,000.
Thereafter. And you think it's bad for business,
I
bad
know
for
it
the
is.
real estate,
I
and
know
bad
it
for
is.
government.
There is no question about
Your
that.
questions to Brian Calder after the break. Mr. Cuvalier had to find new sources of revenue, but how do his taxes compare with a comparable tax in Ontario or Manitoba?
Well, in Ontario, the tax on the first 55,000 is half of 1%. From 55,000 to 250, it's 1%. Over 250, it drops back to 0.5%. So it recognizes that on the higher dollar volume, they don't need to extract as much tax. Now, in Manitoba, they recognize that the first 30,000 is exempt. Yeah. There's no tax on that. Half of 1% on the next 60,000, that takes you to 90. 1% on the next 60,000, that takes you to 150, and then a flat tax of 1.5% from then on. And one should point out there that their average selling price in a home in Winnipeg is $78,000. Ours is $126,000. So we're taxing a higher tax on a higher amount, which works out to about 3 times what it is in Winnipeg, Manitoba.
But
or the province.
Your estimate is that this tax overall in a year will produce double what Cuvalier predicts it will.
Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Good evening, Jack.
Good evening.
Jack, I'd like to suggest a way that people could get around it. Mr. Calder could perhaps help in this. 1% is going to the government. Let's reduce that ridiculous 7% commission that the realtors charge to 6%, and there's the 1% right there. Or better yet, completely ignore these guys, and buyers and sellers can meet in the buy and sell or the newspaper or whatever.
What do you think of that, Brian? It's hardly.
Another realtor heard from, I might say.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd just like to say hats off to Mr. Cuvalier. I think it's about time that the government put this in BC. I think your guest, Mr. Webster, is worried about it because he knows that the real estate market is the one that's going to bear the burden of it, not the consumer. As far as first-time buyers, if they can afford a $100,000 house, I see no reason why they can't afford $101,000. Thank you.
He's obviously someone who's already got his house and isn't out there trying to purchase one for the first time.
From Aldergrove.
Yes, I have a question for your guest, Jack. I would like to know if this tax is going to be applied to manufactured homes, mobile homes, that type of thing, manufactured, where they're manufactured, moved onto a mobile home park or into a mobile home park.
As far as I know, and I haven't seen it in what I've read, which is the preliminary document, it's not going to apply because it's treated more under the Motor Vehicle Type Act or Recreational Vehicle
I think
type,
it depends
type,
entirely
type
on
act,
the status of the motorhome and the status of the property, whether or not it's on wheels.
No, you misinterpreted me, Jack. Manufactured home. They're called mobile homes.
No, not at the plant. No. I can say that for sure. It's not a tax on mobile homes being manufactured. I'm sure of that. Am I not? Yeah, I sure am. Go ahead, please.
Yes, to do with this 1% tax, I believe that the other fellow's statements about the commissions at 7%, and when you have other real estates that are dropping it to 3.5%, I also believe that with the fact that most real estate people are supporting social credit government, perhaps they're getting exactly what they deserve. As well as a voter that has voted for the social credit, good. Let's make it 2% on the whole works. What the heck?
Thank you. Go ahead, please.
Hi, Jack. Isn't it true that with the 5% sales tax, or going down to 5%, that the houses will be cheaper to build, so that 1% shouldn't come too much into effect, with the exception of the price of the land?
Good point, isn't it?
Well, the building component, as opposed to the labor component in building a home, the labor component is substantially higher than the actual product being put into the home. So it might have some benefit in reducing it somewhat, but it certainly won't offset it completely. I just fundamentally disagree, and I think that the public out there is going to realize in 6 months to a year's time the impact that this is going to have. And I know it's really fun for some of them to bash the realtor. The realtor has a contract and is probably one of the best sources of community involvement that you'll ever find, who also, as a professional, has the least amount of claims against their trust accounts or any wrongdoing. I mean, make no mistake, you can take any other profession and we're way ahead of them. And
go ahead, please.
Mr. Calder, I don't think we've gotten your opinion as to why the government has done this. Could you please be a bit specific as to why you think the government has moved? I don't want the answer that they just want to make some money or they want to bring more money into the coffers, but what is your reasoning as to why the government has decided to impose this tax on real estate transactions? I'll hang up. Thank you.
I don't know what their thinking was, and I suppose that's why I'm here objecting to it. No one has asked for the removal of the 7% on the food business, and I happen to own a percentage of a restaurant, and we never, as an industry, appealed to the government to removal of the 7% on meals. We've never asked for a reduction in the sales tax. So for them to fiddle with what was already working and say, we'll take off the 1% and reduce it to 6%, and we'll eliminate the meals tax, and to put it on to shelter people's homes, it's not coming out of the realtor's pocket, it's coming out of your home. And why they would do that is beyond me.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I have a comment for all of these people making remarks about first-time home buyers. Most of us first-time home buyers have to scrape pretty hard to get into a very inexpensive type home.
Exactly.
My husband and I have just bought our first home, and we bought at the bottom of the market. Now, if we'd had to pay an extra $500 or $600, we'd have had to wait another year, maybe 2 years, before we could have bought our house.
Exactly.
It really infuriates me that the government thinks they can do this to us.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening. Everybody seems to be so much against this 1% tax.
It's a progressive tax. It's 1 and then it goes to 2.
Yes, I realize that. But, I don't really see what the big deal is. It wasn't too long ago that we were getting a grant of about $5,000. And now, all of a sudden, there's just a small tax on it. Everybody's so much opposed to it. I think it's just about time that somebody decided, it's about time that people started giving back some of the things that they have already received. The economy is tough, and I think the government needs the money. They do need the revenue, so what's the big deal? I think it's really an opportune time for this tax to come in and sort of to dampen the real estate market. It seems to be...
Their constituents need the money, too. A government cannot give you what it doesn't first take away. I would rather that the public was left with their money to choose to spend it as they wish, not have the government run it through Victoria and then give you back a percentage of it.
But he was reminding us very forcibly of the old days when you could get government second mortgages. Can you still?
Yes.
You still can.
Yeah.
Can you?
One of the biggest points that's overlooked on this is if you take the average home at $125,000 and a person puts 12.5 down, or 10%, the 1% tax on $125,000 is $1,250. That's 10% of that purchaser's equity. Okay? It's not 1% tax. If you take it to their actual equity, it's 10% in that case.
Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yep.
I would just like to point out the inequity of the person who lives in the city compared to the person who lives in a northern BC town, who makes the same wage as the person in the city, but whose cost of housing is approximately, say, $60,000 for a good house in Williams Lake, is the equivalent of a $150,000 house in Vancouver. And once again, we're taking advantage of the fact that the people in the city seem to be making the bigger payment to the government. And the other point I'd like to make is the fact that by saying that the realtor should absorb the cost, the average wage of a realtor, it seems to me, is approximately $20,000.
Gross.
And
That's the gross, yes.
yes, and that is not including expenses, of which realtors have very heavy expenses. I think that lowering their wages anymore is really very unfair.
Thank you. Well, Brian Calder, longtime real estate man and director of the Real Estate Board of Vancouver, the public is not with you all the way, is it?
I don't think they've realized the full impact of it yet. Part of the show, and I appreciate being on here, is to express those opinions, listen to the public, let's debate it, and let's find out just what the impact is going to be on the general public. And I thank you for the opportunity.
No, and you say it'll double the revenue that Cuvalier estimates it's going to get if the market keeps moving.
If it even just stays static, yes.
Good. Now I'll be back after the break. Another little nag at the Van der Zalm first budget. As you know, a user fee takes effect, I think it's July the 1st, for certain ancillary medical services. Podiatric, that's your big toe, chiropractic, naturopathic, and physiotherapy. Physiotherapy is a little different because it is the only ancillary service authorized by doctors under the medical plan. And here I have tonight Craig Ross and Jan Lowcock, who are members of the BC Association of Physiotherapists in private practice. How many are there privately practicing physiotherapists?
We have approximately 230 individual members in our private practice association, and there are roughly 300 private practitioners in the province.
And I'm right that your cases are referred to you from the patient's doctor?
That's correct.
How is this $5 user fee going to be applied? I still don't quite understand that clearly.
It was a bit of a shock to us too, but I think we have to accept it. We have to collect it at the front, and then what do we do with it? We keep it, actually, because the government then takes it from our check from Victoria. So we collect their fee. If they don't pay, the government still takes it because we have a lower income.
In other words, the $11.20, is that a contract fee you negotiate with the BC Medical Services Plan?
That's right. That's
$11.20.
$11.20 for a treatment, that's correct.
And as of July the 1st, you've got to collect the cash or bill the patient for that.
We bill them for $5, and the Medical Services Plan will then send us a check for the remaining $6.20.
Now, what has the reaction been among your patients?
Curiosity, and I think there's been some misinterpretation. Several of my patients have thought that physiotherapists are going to make $5 more.
That's what I thought.
And that's how I can see how that could be interpreted, and I think it's very important that we make the public aware that $5 of the $11.20 is now going to come out of their pocket rather than out of the government coffers.
What's the reaction from your patients, Craig, up to now?
Yeah, rather the same feeling. Not sure what's going to happen. I had one person, and he wasn't short of money either, I felt, but he said, oh, I must get all my family in before July the 1st. You know, I think they realise that they're going to have to pay from then on.
But you can't get the family in unless the doctor refers them with a specific ailment.
That's right.
Unlike some of the other ancillary services. Am I correct in that?
That's right, yes. The doctors refer patients to us. We're part of the ancillary medical services. He refers for a specific condition, and we treat them for that.
Now, what about those who are on medical service cards, on welfare? Will you be able to bill your full $11.20 for those particular treatment without collecting the $5?
We're given to understand, and again, our information is really coming through the media rather than any official word from MSP, but our information is that those individuals who are on premium assistance, and this will include individuals on social assistance, will have that $5 user fee paid for them from the government. So we'll probably receive a check then for the full $11.20.
Now, if I don't want to pay the $5 and go to my privately practicing physiotherapist on my doctor's recommendation, is there anywhere else I can get the treatment?
No, there's not.
Can I not go to hospital?
Oh, yeah, you can go to the hospital, sure. The problem with the hospitals right now is that they are so full of patients. There's a 2 to 6 week waiting list. It's interesting, too, that that a survey was done in '82, and I think it was 3 times as much then to treat in a hospital as a private practice, so probably about 5 times in '87 the cost compared to the private practice. But the patient can go there. They have to drive further, of course.
Is there a limit to the number of treatments one gets under physiotherapy?
In a private practice, yes. The people who are age 65 and under can receive up to 12 physiotherapy visits. And those age 65 and over can receive up to 15. In a hospital, there is an unlimited number of visits. What's patient?
So you may well lose a number of your patients who don't want to pay the $5 to the hospitals, although it'll be up to the doctors to decide in which channel to direct them, will it not?
I think there'll be a certain amount of reluctance on the part of physicians to send patients to private practitioners when they realize that they may be on a tight budget.
Do you think the government understood the fact that you would have to deduct the $5, would only be getting $6.20 and plus $5 from the patient when they told you about it?
I think they understood that. I think, you know, it's been in the Inner Five and it's been at caucus, and yeah, I think they've understood that. I'm not sure whether the government understood that we work with the medical profession and that medical treatment is going to be curtailed because of an imposition of $5.
Say that again. You're not sure that they understood that your patients are referred to you by doctors?
That's right, as part of the medical team. And so a doctor suggests that you need our services, physiotherapy services, but you may not be in the position to pay the $5, and so his treatment is curtailed.
Oh, I see, because for chiropractic and podiatric, if that's the right word, you don't have to go to the doctor first because you only have the kind of same limited number of treatments.
Patient can come in off the street. They can be a primary practitioner.
Do you not think that people will raise the $5 once they know about it, or do you feel that you will, one, lose business, and that two, patients will tend to go into more expensive $50 treatments in hospitals if they can?
I think there are a couple of possible scenarios. I think a good number of patients will be able to afford the $5. And then those on premium assistance won't have to worry about it. It's the few patients that we deal with every day in our practice that are going to fall between the cracks and have to come up with the $5 themselves. And physiotherapy isn't always a one-shot treatment. A patient may be attending over the period of several weeks for 6 or 8 treatments. So that's you know, you're looking at a $40 or $60 cost rather than a $5 cost. Mm-hmm. What will happen is that I think the $5 fee will impose a deterrent. People will try to put off coming to a physiotherapist. And that has quite a few implications. It's going to increase the chronicity and the severity of the person's problem, but also those people, if they can't go to physio, they're not just going to disappear. They're going to seek help elsewhere and lower cost alternatives. And in the patients that we see, I think it's fair to say that a lot of them will return to see their physician more frequently. A physician's visit costs more than a physiotherapist's visit. They will likely be referred higher up the specialty ladder in the medical profession more quickly. A visit to a medical specialist, an orthopedic surgeon, for example, is far more costly than a visit to a physiotherapist. So
you're saying that it will have a general downgrading, in a way, of what is presently a very useful ancillary service, which at the cheapest possible rate, whereas if people try to find a way around it, it's going to cost us a lot more money.
That's right.
Okay, what do you think of the physiotherapy situation? I don't know much about, I know the other ones on which they are charging the $5, but my two friends, Craig Ross, physiotherapist, and Jan Lowcock, will take your calls on this subject after the break. I have two privately practicing physiotherapists, members of the BC Association, who are explaining this new $5 deterrent fee. Go ahead, please.
Yes. I'd like to ask the question, when the physiotherapist says that's 12 visits, is that 12 per annum or 12 for disability? For instance, if I have a carpal tunnel now and then later get a frozen shoulder, am I limited to 12 visits per annum, or how does that work? And then I suggest that this is the thin edge of the wedge for the breakup of the Medicare system, and I hate to even put it on the air, but once they start grabbing, making these people collect the first $5, then I'm going to be paying X for my lab fees, Y for my X-ray, etc., etc.
As a matter of fact, Mr. Cuvelier made it perfectly clear that as part of his approached the federal government to, although he picked up an extra $90 million this year by scrapping deterrent fees, that he wants them to get the deterrent fees on the medical service plan. Now, the answer to her question.
The answer to that is that you get 12 visits per annum.
Per annum?
Yeah, not per prescription.
How much do you charge for private visits?
I charge $15.
About $15, is that about it? Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, Jack. It's been a long time. To your two visitors there, for paraplegics and quadriplegics that have a lot of physiotherapy and chiropractic treatment over the years, which is a carry-on thing, what's going to happen in this case? Have they got any idea at all?
So my understanding is that most of the physiotherapists right now in private practice are not quadriplegics and paraplegics do not form a large part of our caseload. I think that they are primarily treated in the outpatient department, for instance, at the GF Strong Rehabilitation Center or Shaughnessy Hospital, where they have specialized spinal cord injury-directed care.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack, I'd like to know what this is going to do to the ICBC thing, whereas now they're asking you to exhaust your 12 visits before they start picking up the tab. Now, I'd like to know what happens then.
With ICBC, we're not sure. We haven't been told much, but we don't think that they have to pay the $5. Similarly, with workers' compensation, we're not sure about that, but we don't think that they have to pay at this stage. Would that be right?
Mm-hmm.
Good, thank you. At the moment, therefore, if I come for ICBC for 20 visits, because the doctor says so, that's covered.
That's right.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Webster and guests. At present, I'm going to a physiotherapist for a shoulder treatment, but my problem is we are seniors. We pay $444 for MSP for the year, and here we're being asked to pay an extra $5 for each treatment. Why aren't we covered in the first place in the $444 a year?
Well, you were covered in the first place in the $444, but this is the first move by the government to go to deterrent fees. And I would presume, Jan, that the reason they've gone to deterrent fees on what I'm calling these ancillary services is that they are not covered in the federal agreement, and the federal agreement can't tell them to stop it.
That's correct.
Is that right?
We're not affected as a necessary service under the Canada Health Act, and therefore the government is free to impose this user fee.
The charges for emergency and whatnot were under the agreement, and that's why we got the money.
It affected the
real sad that they have to have this burden put on their shoulders.
Thank you.
I agree with you.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, my question is concerning the physiotherapy and chiropractic visits. When you get to your 12 and you're paying $15 for the next visit and so on, which would mean another $5, $20. How is that paid to the government when you were saying before that they would deduct it from the payment?
Okay, I think we can explain that, Jan.
Yeah, the user fee does not apply to the private rates for physiotherapy after the 12 treatments are exhausted. That fee is unchanged. It's not affected by this at all.
In other words, you're not putting that up to $20.
Not at all.
If
Not
15 is the average.
That's right.
Only applies to the 12 government-financed fees.
Yeah, or the 15 where the
for seniors.
citizens.
That's correct.
15 for
I really feel that it was going to not clean up an act, but I think people are going to think twice, because a lot of people I know through the chiropractic that I get myself done and talk to friends, they sort of abuse it a bit, and I have a feeling that maybe it'll clean up the act a little bit. Not on the chiropractor or physiotherapist side, but I think of the people who are abusing it.
The patient side. That's the argument for deterrent fees by those who care to make that argument. Go ahead, please.
Mr. Webster.
Yes.
I had a low back injury, and I had 15 treatments, and they said that if I wanted any more, this is before the new tax.
Yeah.
It would cost me $20 for each treatment.
Okay. Is $20 the charge made by some?
The Private Practitioners Association has established a suggested fee schedule for private rates, and the per treatment cost or fee is $20. Some practitioners, it's not binding. Practitioners are free to charge less, as Craig does.
Good. Go ahead from Victoria.
Yes, Mr. Webster, I think that this $5 fee is going to affect a lot of senior citizens who will not be able to have this treatment when they need it. Now, I, for instance, had an infection in the rib cage, and after 2 months, the doctor sent me to a physiotherapist for deep heat and other treatment. And finally, after 13 weeks, the pain subsided. Now, if this comes back again, no way am I going to be able to afford to pay for physiotherapy.
That's tough if you're on a minimum income, is it not?
That's right. These are the people that we're concerned about.
Yeah.
Thank you. Go ahead, you were going to say something?
I was just going to say minimum income. Students, too, often, they can't afford it. Children, remember, they're also this fee. You know, mum or dad has to give them the $5. A lot of people are affected.
Go ahead from Victoria.
Yes, I'm in the same boat as most people that have called you about having an injury in my shoulder and having had physiotherapy on and off for 8 months for frozen shoulder. Now, I've been thinking about this because I know some people who can well afford pensioners. They're quite well off, and they still have this privilege. I was wondering if there wasn't a way where they could exempt people who are getting the supplement.
Do you know if that's the position yet?
We have no information about people receiving supplementary pension income. As far as we know, the only exemptions are for people on premium assistance with MSP.
Good. Not good, but thanks for the answer. Go ahead, please.
Hi. When I became pregnant at 7 weeks, my hips popped out and caused me severe pain because they twisted and my vertebrae went strange. And now I'm in my 8th month, and I have been going along with physiotherapy to keep everything as close as possible to where it's supposed to be. But, I mean, if this were to happen, I mean, it would have cost me well over, 100, maybe more, because of the amount of visits I have to pay to keep my body functional until the end of my pregnancy. Now, I don't know. I mean, with them making me leave work, I mean, how would I go about being able to continue affording this?
Well, that's the problem.
You know, it's very frustrating from a middle-income family.
You bring up an interesting point. There are a lot of people who are unable to work because of their condition, but because their condition did not occur due to an injury at work, they're not covered by workers' compensation. So you have someone in the worst of all possible worlds that they can't work and they can't pay the fee.
I think we'll have people, in fact, that we will have to help. There are times when we will say, we can't turn them away, so we will treat them for that low fee.
Yeah, or for who have exhausted their official visits under MSP with their $5, then you'll have to subsidize their private visits.
That's right.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, I'd like to contribute the fact that physiotherapists are operating on a 1981 schedule, I believe.
1982, yes.
82 schedule. Yeah. So they're way behind, and to catch this $5 and have to raise their income is going to be a problem.
Why on a 1982 schedule?
Because MSP wouldn't negotiate until just two months ago. And we did have fee negotiations then. Nothing was mentioned in the fee negotiations about this.
Was this your new rate, 11.20?
No. There's a new rate coming. In fact, it hasn't even been passed by Cabinet yet. But it seems to be in limbo now because this came down last Friday.
So you're on the horns of a number of dilemmas. Well, thank you for being so informative. Craig Ross.
One other thing is that...
I don't think of it time. Craig Ross and Jan Lowcock from the BC Association of Physiotherapists in Private Practice, and I'll be back after the break. Tomorrow I enter again the arena of Lyle Island in a special debate with David Suzuki, the champion of saving the Moresbys, at 5 p.m. precisely.